Now, I want to take the time to morb. I want to morb with you. I felt left out for quite a while, chat. You know, obviously, Morbius, which went through many delays. Originally, it was supposed to come out in 2020, but then we were hit the pandemic, chat. Oh, one of the great tragedies of the COVID-19 pandemic, chat. The first pandemic we've had in over a century. One of the casualties of entertainment was Morbius. And we missed out on that film. I know we were all really excited for it. And they delayed it again. And then they finally had a release date sometime in early 2022, February, March, April. I forget when it came out yet, but it came out and it came and went. You know, I was not really impressed with the marketing, chat. I'm very much against Sony's strategy when it comes to their superhero films. I have not been the biggest fan when it comes to how they've handled Spider-Man himself or, you know, the various Spider-Man properties. Really like what Marvel Disney has done, Marvel Disney proper, with the Tom Holland Spider-Man films. I think great. And you know what? You could throw Sony a bone, even though I don't think they deserve a lot of credit for it. I think it's, you know, a lot of people that, you know, like Phil Lord and Chris Miller. But with the end of the Spider-Verse, really good. But outside of that, outside the Disney era, or the Disney, you know, side of things when it comes to Spider-Man and what Phil Lord and Chris Miller and the filmmakers behind In the Spider-Verse did, I have not liked what Sony has done with their films and what they plan to do. Obviously, we've gotten 2 Venom films, which I've reviewed in some context or talked on some context on here or other platforms. I do not like those films. Now, I do have a specific bias. I do not like Venom as a character. I just don't feel like there's much to him. Not saying that he's not popular. He's very popular. He's been in the pop culture zeitgeist for 30 years. And he has a very cool aesthetic. He's a very cool look. And I will always say he has a very cool look. But I'm just not a fan of the character and his personality. Interesting things maybe in other adaptations like Agent Venom. But other than that, I'm just not a fan of the character. Now, when it comes to Morbius, which I was all right, it's kind of weird that you're making a standalone Morbius movie. The character is just not nearly as popular as someone like Venom. I mean, I'm not saying anything controversial. I feel like that's kind of widely accepted as a fact, chat. I don't think that's very subjective. I think it's very objective, if anything. And, you know, he's a Spider-Man villain, a D-list Spider-Man villain from, I think, the late 1970s. Now, there have been adaptations of Morbius in different, mediums. I mean, probably the most famous, case of Morbius being adapted was in the Spider-Man animated series in Season 2. And we also, I think, saw him again maybe in Season 3. I mean, that's how I probably best know the characters, through the 90s animated series. And they did some fun stuff with him, sucking the plasma. But they had to, basically retcon certain things or make sure that it was appropriate for a children's show. And so instead of him sucking the blood from people with his teeth, Chad, he had these like little suckers on his hands and sucking up the sweet plasma. Like, that was his thing. Although his whole origin was interesting. Him experimenting on, bat DNA of Spider-Man's mutated DNA and trying to cure the people of his country of this horrible blood disease. Like, that was interesting. I mean, not everything was handled well in that show, in my opinion, but whatever, But still, Morbius is just not a very well-known entity to the mainstream, even among a lot of comic book fans. Like, we know of him, but I wouldn't say we would all be like, oh, yeah, Morbius, one of our favorite Spider-Man villains. I don't think he's in our top 3 or top 5, top 10, probably not in our top 20 either. The only other case of Morbius being in the pop culture zeitgeist that I could possibly think of is in a deleted ending to the original Blade, chat, where you had the director of Blade, Stephen Norrington, I believe that's his name, who I think has since retired, at least from cinematic fare. I don't know if he's still doing television stuff or work in the film industry. Infamously, he also directed The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Which was a huge commercial and critical flop. Kuroki Okami, good to see you. Good evening. Hard hands, hope you're doing well. I'm reviewing Morbius, also talking about the character's history. But there is a deleted scene of Blade, chat, which was supposed to act as the original film's ending, where Blade and his companion, the doctor lady, they are being watched by a mysterious figure who we later learn, is actually Morbius. But because of the fact that, and I was at the studio on this, like, no one knows who Morbius is. And like, there's nothing to indicate like that character is Morbius. It's like, let's scrap that ending. And they did the whole thing in Russia instead, which kind of retcons weird things in Blade 2. But in any case, that's the only other time I can think of Morbius in pop culture, chat. So it doesn't really exactly have a foothold. And so that brings us, to this movie. This infamous movie, chat, with Jared Leto as the character. And I did not see this when this came out. I skipped it because I was just not interested in it. There was one trailer I liked. I don't know if it was the second or third or fourth trailer. They released like 4 or 5 trailers for this goddamn thing. And they used music from the Lost Boys, and I feel like and they did the cinematic version of this famous song from the Lost Boys, and I'm pretty sure that's the only reason why I like that trailer is because they used that song. And because it dealt with vampires. Like, oh, I see what you did there. And also the character's name is Michael. And they famously say this one character's name, one of the main characters in the Lost Boys, his name is Michael, and they say Michael like over 100 times in the film. And I was like, oh, it kind of stood out. But other than that, I didn't have a lot of excitement. People saw it, did not review well, did not make a lot of money. But for whatever reason, the meme culture, internet culture, just they grabbed a hold of this film and they made it infamous through their GIFs and their memes and funny internet videos. So much so that Sony took that as an indication that people want to see Morbius again. Let's put out in theaters. And I'm like, I don't know why the fuck whoever did that, whoever the people were that said that. I mean, I don't want I don't want people to lose their jobs. But if I'm running a film studio and I had people in positions of power and influence, and they thought that funny internet memes meant people want to see this movie and they'll go to a theater to see it, I'd be like, you're out of your goddamn mind. You should be fired. They brought the movie back to like 1,000 theaters, and I think in the United States, and it only made like $80,000. So it flopped a second time. Pathetic. So sad. I hope they should have lost their jobs. Yeah. It also indicates kind of the what the structure is and how dysfunctional things are at Sony right now. It's like, wow, it's in a really bad place. I would love to ask Amy Pascal about that, and Adria Arjona, all those people. Tom Rothman, I think he was also in charge of Sony. Just incompetent people. But I'd be very curious to ask him, why did they do that? In any case, I have finally seen the film. I want to do this in honor or dishonor of the release of Jamie Foxx's new vampire film, Daywalker, or The Day Shift, whatever the hell it's called. It doesn't matter. Looks kind of generic to me. But I was like, vampire theme, might as well talk about this movie. And you know what, chap? Kind of want to go over it. Just the premise, in case you don't know. This is another entry in the Spider-Man-less Spider-Verse, Sony's Spider-Man verse without Spider-Man, which is, to this day, I'm like, what is that? What is that? It's so weird. I guess you could say it's the Venom verse, because they do refer to Venom in this film. Good to see you, Rocker Birdie. Hope you're doing well. But yeah, I guess it's the third entry in the Venom verse, if you will, and it focuses on the character of Dr. Michael Morbius and his weird surrogate brother, Milo, who is also named Lucian, but whatever. There's a weird reason as to why he renames it, but it doesn't matter. They become living vampires because they have this blood disease. Michael Morbius studies medicine and vampire bat DNA and decides, let's combine them and see what happens. And he becomes a vampiric-esque creature that needs to feed on plasma, or blood in this case, chat. But he also gets a whole bunch of cool fantasy sci-fi powers along the way. And then there's exposition dumps and more exposition, and there's a dance scene for some reason. But for the most part, that's kind of the plot. Jared Harris is in the movie. He's in the beginning and is at the end of the film. There's we have Tyrese Gibson's here. Michael Keaton's in the movie. He looks confused. But that's the general premise of the movie, chat. I got to say, just to start off with my overall thoughts before I get into more details, this, to me, is the very definition of a slog of a movie. It feels incredibly dated for a superhero or for like just a genre film in general. Especially one that was released, supposed to be released in 2020, but one that was released in 2022. It almost feels like it comes from like just a different era where you had studios that just didn't trust comic book or graphic novel source material, and they felt the constant need to just dumb it down for the audiences, to over-explain everything. If anything, it's, to be more specific about it, it feels like a comic book movie from during the late 1990s, or just during the 1990s to like the mid 2000s. So it's very similar in structure and pacing and character development, or lack of character development, to films like Spawn or Daredevil or Ghost Rider, those types of movies. I have to admit, like it's It's not the kind of movie where, oh, it's so bad, it's good. It's like, oh, this is so bad, I can laugh at so many things. It's really not. That was what I was hearing consistently from a lot of people that went to go see it. Like, oh, everyone's saying it's bad. I can't wait to see it because I'm going to laugh at it. And I have to tell you, chat, there's not a lot to laugh at. It's just because it's so incredibly boring and it's so exposition heavy. I mean, constantly throughout this film, you would just have characters regurgitating, just like, all right, we gotta let all the dum-dums in the audience know that this is the science and it can happen. It's kind of realistic, but that's all the characters do. Is just like, it's word salad, it's word vomit, it's like an exchange chat into each other's mouths. Like, no one has any chemistry since they're constantly talking about the science mumbo jumbo. It's like, I don't care. Just like, okay, just say you literally could just like, listen, sci-fi science is fantastical in nature. And we as the audience can let a few things, it's like, you know what, just tell us a fun story, get some charismatic characters, and we'll go along of your science, chat. Some of the best genre movies that kind of deal with this subject have done this, like David Cronenberg's The Fly, which is kind of very similar, which is definitely, there's a lot of that in this movie. A lot of that DNA is in this movie, chat. If a person who has this disease is trying to cure themselves and is becoming more monstrous as the film goes along, it's because of through science and experimentation that they did it, you know? And it's like, it's telepods and teleportation, like the science, how it's possible, it doesn't matter. It's just what makes that movie, like The Fly, so good is that you have great actors in Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis, and you buy the relationship because so much of that movie is just focused on their romance, and that's why it works. And when the horrible things happen, you actually care about them. You feel sorry for them. Like, you don't in this case because no one feels real. It just feels like they're literally reading the script and going like, all right, this thing and this chromosome and that DNA sequence. Like, I don't give a shit. You never buy the relationships between any of the characters in the movie because they just feel hollow. There's nothing to them. They're so one-dimensional. On the more, special effects side of things, in terms of, like, the fight sequences and things like that, honestly, it just feels very cheap. Very cheap, and also in some cases just weird, and like, I can kind of understand why they do certain things, because they want to differentiate from their other movies, because a lot of the Sony films that we've gotten, they do share similarities in terms of how the characters' powers work, and I'll explain in more detail, but they also just make no sense. And they're just very inconsistent. So for example, like in the Spider movies, you have Spider-Man jumping around, swinging, all those things. Venom is doing the exact same things as well in the movie. Like, he's swinging around, he's jumping, he's basically, he's the evil version of Spider-Man. With Morbius, he's kind of doing the same thing too. He's jumping around, he's sticking to walls, he's climbing on things. And I knew, like, the filmmaker, what they must have been thinking, which is being made by Daniel Espinosa, which I've not really seen much of their work. But you're like, okay, to differentiate this from Venom or from Spider-Man, we're going to have this weird kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's like this vibration. I guess it's supposed to be like echolocation, but it's also like very wispy. It's like almost there's like, trails of the character. Like when you look at Morbius, it almost looked like this melting effect when he's moving. And I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing. But to me, it comes off so CGI heavy that it just doesn't, I don't buy it. I don't buy the visual effect, where I would buy Spider-Man swinging around New York. Hell, I would buy Venom swinging around San Francisco. Like, those movies look better than this one. I could tell that they were trying to do something visually different. It just didn't work. And I even noticed in the movie, like, you had characters, you had, like, bystanders in the film, the general public, civvies, if you will, who were clearly supposed to react to the fight sequences, and there's just one that just stood out to me, because when I watch it in my audio commentary for the movie, there's one that stood out to me where you have in the movie, Matt Smith is the villain. He's just the evil version of Morbius. Like, I'm an evil vampire. It's like, okay, cool. And they're fighting in the subway, and they crash down this escalator, and they kind of land in the middle of the floor, and you have a lady with a coffee cup just walking around, just like, oh, look at that. Well, what's that all about? But, like, not running away, not going, oh, or not, like, dropping the cup or freaking out like you would do if you saw two living vampires just fucking wrestle in the middle of the subway. You would freak out. She's like, oh, well, that's weird. She might as well just fucking took a swig of her drink. It's like, you got to have your actors, you got to have your extras react to these things because that in that way it'll help sell the effect better, the special effects and the visual sequences, and it just doesn't. It just comes off like, all right, well, they clearly don't believe in it, so why should I? It's terrible. It's terrible. They also steal some sequences, too. Obviously, there's no doubt that they're influenced by Spider-Man. They're influenced by Venom. That comes naturally. But there's also, they steal a lot from Batman movies, particularly with Batman Begins. Because you remember in Batman Begins, chat, of Christian Bale, when, in the opening where he falls into the well and the bats surround him and everything like that. And then you see it again in later on when he's older and he discovers the Batcave, what will soon be the Batcave, and the bats are swirling around him. And then we get another sequence with a lot of bats in that movie, where he uses his echolocation device to summon the bats so then he can escape and he can take Rachel out of the Arkham Asylum so he can then cure her. Remember that? It's all that. But all of those scenes, everything with bats is pretty much in Morbius too. Like there are several scenes when Morbius is just in the opening of the movie. Which I don't understand the opening of the movie. Like we're in Costa Rica, which by the way, if you're Costa Rica in a genre film, that place is scary as all hell. No offense against Costa Ricans, but anytime you're a location in a genre movie, you have some kind of monster on your island. Whether it be fucking dinosaurs, in this case, giant vampire bats. Which again, vampire bats are very small, and in this movie they make them really big for some reason. It doesn't matter, but you have a whole opening sequence when you have where he's swarmed by bats for some reason. You have another one where he's in this giant tube and it's straight out of Batman Begins. He's like, and then he does it again to defeat Matt Smith, Milo, Lucius, whatever the fuck his name is. He uses the vampire bats because they're his friends. They're like, as he says, they're like his family, chat. I'm like their brother, which I'm like, okay. And he literally uses this. I was like, I didn't expect this one. I didn't have this on my Morbius bingo card. He literally does a Kamehameha. He does a Kamehameha. He does a big Bane attack, Gala gun, whatever you want to call it, chat. Fucking special beam cannon with bats. Against Matt Smith, chat, and he's like, and he can't get up because the bats are just literally yeeting themselves at Matt Smith, keeping him on the ground, so then he could fucking put a syringe in him with some splooge, with some anti-vampiric splooge or whatever. And I was like, that's weird. But it's so much that those scenes just reminded me of Batman Begins and a lot of Batman films, but in particular Batman Begins. There's also, again, They use a lot of CGI in the faces. I guess there's some makeup, but most of it is CGI enhanced. And they do this weird mouth thing where the mouth elongates constantly. And that also feels like an artifact from the 2000s. It reminded me of the way the vampiric zombie creatures looked in I Am Legend with Will Smith. And again, this movie just feels like it's cherry-picking different things. Remember how those things yell and their mouth becomes really elongated? There are so many sequences with Jared Leto and Matt Smith where they do that. It was like, you just remind me of those creatures from I Am Legend, which is not great. Because I like half that movie. When that dog dies and the movie gets worse, and the movie's just goes downhill. And, it's before we see the creatures. That first 45 minutes of that film is this is really goddamn good. This is a full price good. And you buy the relationship between Will Smith and that dog. Watch my I Am Legend review. It's on my YouTube channel. But then we get the vampire creatures, and the CGI looks terrible. Even at the time it looked bad. It looks even worse now. And the way Michael Morbius and Lucius / Milo / Matt Smith's faces look are pretty much exactly like those creatures from that movie. It looks too rubbery. It looks unnatural. I know they're monsters. They're supposed to be, but it's just not great. Yeah, you overextend yourself. It's too overproduced in a way, and not in a good way. Comes across cartoony. When the fucking Spider-Man 90s animated series Morbius is better designed than yours, that's a problem. And then, we get to the end of this movie. It ends how all these kind of 90s era or early 2000s era superhero films do with because there's not a lot of action in this movie. That's the other thing too. They have action sequences, but they feel constantly and consistently, they feel like they're trying to cover up the violence. And this is also, to me, a big, warning for the potential Blade movie. I'm not saying the Blade movie is going to be as bad as Morbius, but Morbius is a PG-13 vampire film. And with that, they are taking extra precautions not to show too much violence, which is fucking confusing because it's a vampire movie, and you expect there to be some violence in it, right? But there are so many sequences where it's clearly implied that he is gutting people, like, Morbius, gutting people who are innocent. Well, we'll get to that in a second, because I have some issues with it's like, oh, you're not a bad person. It's like, he murdered a lot of people in this movie, but whatever. But, like, he's clearly gutting people, slitting people's throats, gouging out eyeballs, stabbing people. I mean, everything you can imagine. And that camera is constantly cutting away. Or you have people going, ugh, or, oh, like, but you don't see a blood. They also do something that I noticed too. They have that, like, what looks like blood spray in the camera occasionally, but it's not. It looks like black dirt hit the camera. Like, they don't even want to, like, it's like, even though they're, like, clearly doing, like, a blood spray effect, they're like, oh, no, it ain't blood. That's, like, black dirt. It doesn't even look like blood. It doesn't even drip like blood. So it's very confusing, and they constantly cover that up. And the reason why I'm concerned about Blade is because if Blade is going to take a similar approach to Morbius and be PG-13, this is like, we should not stand for that, because that's bullshit. All the horror-esque sequences in this movie are just tame, chat. And it's really, really annoying. It takes away from the fact that they're supposed to be vampiric monsters, and you're not letting them be vampiric monsters. All right? It's so lackluster. And then we get to, the big thing that this movie was selling itself on was the fact that it was connected to the MCU, that it was connected to Spider-Man films. And I guess they cut out a lot of that. They definitely cut out a lot. It's like the stuff that we saw in the trailers, like with Michael Keaton, like, actually, they do meet the end credits. But there's this whole sequence where he's like, hey, what's up, Doc? How you doing? Like, that's not in this movie at all. All that is gone. In this movie, the end credit sequence make no sense, especially when you think about Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, listen, Spider-Man No Way Home's interdimensional travel, the rules were, if I have a criticism against them, which I have few criticisms, I really like No Way Home, but they are inconsistent. They're inconsistent. But we know, based on what the movie says, that those villains coming forward into Tom Holland's Spider-Man, into the 616 dimension, those villains all know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. That's why they're coming in. That was the context of the spell. In this one, which again, I don't know how, but at the end of the movie, you see the big purple cracks, into the timeline or whatever, show up as they did in No Way Home. And Adrian Toomes, Michael Keaton's Vulture, is like teleported into a cell. And it's so terrible, because he kind of was like, oh, what was that? And he looks at himself in the mirror, making sure he's okay. And then it's like, oh, God, I hope Michael Keaton was paid well for this, because he's delivering dialogue like, I sure hope the food tastes better here. It's like, oh, my God. And then we cut to a news report. I was like, oh, a random person teleported into a cell. We don't know if it's related to the vampire killings. But this Adrian Toomes is going to be a free man, and he's going to be freed or whatever. And then it cuts, and we get the rest of the credits, and then we get an additional credit scene where Morbius is gone. I don't know. He, after the battle with his friend Matt Smith, he I don't know. He left New York, I guess, and he's somewhere in the American Southwest, I guess. And he's going to a location. We don't know why. He's just going to a location on his GPS. He gets out, and then he's waiting. And then we see, like, this guy looks like he's got a rocket strapped to his back, coming closer and closer to him, right? And it's the Vulture. How the fuck did Adrian Toomes get his Vulture suit? How did he doesn't exist in this reality. It doesn't matter. But he shows up there. And Morbius is like, you wanted to meet me? He's like, yeah, I've read a lot about you, Dr. Michael Morbius. And yeah, that whole thing, it was crazy. But I feel like we should team up. And he's like, why should we team up? Because I think the person responsible for all of this is Spider-Man. And it's like, what? Michael Morbius doesn't even know who Spider-Man is. He doesn't exist in his reality. Venom, they reference Venom. And they reference Venom 2 times. One where you have these 2 detective characters that were just the non-existent personalities who are like, I haven't seen something this crazy since San Francisco with Venom. And then they do another reference where Michael Morbius is like, and you see in the trailers, I am Venom. And it's like, okay. And that's it. But I'm still so confused as to how these end credit scenes make any sense. They don't make any sense. And it's like, are you setting up, like Michael Morbius, you're clearly setting him up as a hero. Okay. So why would he work with the Vulture? Why would he work with him? Because he doesn't know who even Spider-Man is. It's like none of this. It's horrible. Horrible writing. Aside from that, I mean, I can only think like they're trying to establish a weird, just terribly messed up version of the Sinister Six. That's the only thing I can think of. That they're trying to do the Sinister Six, and they won't be the Sinister Six. They'll be like a good version of the Sinister Six. I don't know. I'm not sure. They're desperate. Yes, actually, Caitlin McGee, good to see you, by the way. They're desperate to make connections to this. And it's just not making any sense. Say what you will, but listen, you can criticize, the MCU and Marvel in all sorts of different ways. I think they've succeeded more than they failed. But one of the things I do appreciate is how they're able to connect a lot of things and connect them pretty goddamn well. The track record is pretty good for the most part. Definitely, they stumbled on occasion, there's no doubt. But for the most part, they're able to connect things or retcon things to make things make sense. But Sony, they just don't give a fuck. They're like, whatever, it doesn't matter. The Sinister Six, I don't know. We'll see. But it's still, the way in which they are forming the Sinister Six, which is this really cool villainous group where you have all these different villains fighting Spider-Man. I mean, what a waste. This is the way they're doing it. And Sony's been trying to do this for fucking years, over a decade. They've been trying to build towards this all the way back in the Mark Webb-verse where they were going to do a Sinister Six movie, and that all fell apart. But they're trying to do it again, and already it's like, this is not working. Kind of to wrap up my overall thoughts before getting into some of the characters, its place in pop culture is interesting to me. I'm just kind of surprised, honestly, when finally watching it, I'm very surprised by the internet memes and the GIFs and people's reactions to this movie. It seems that like people took it upon themselves to make something out of nothing, like this, because this movie's boring. There's not a lot of meat on the bone, chat. It doesn't have any interesting or characters. There's no particular sequence in the film I think, like, that's really cool. Maybe there's one interesting character in the movie. Interesting is not the right word. Fun character, let's say. But outside of that, like, there's not a lot there. At least with, like, Venom, like, there's things to laugh at and there's to mock and things like a turd in the wind. It's like just crazy shit, or Tom Hardy's zany performance. Like, there's stuff in that film, like, I can see people going laughing and having fun with. But in here, there's not really a lot. And so I'm just kind of confused as to, like, what's the origin of all this? Like, I don't really understand it, honestly. I mean, I'm happy to morb. It's morbing time, Chad, and I morbed with you, but I don't understand. I'm having an existential morbing, if you will. I don't know why I'm morbing. I don't know what the purpose of morbing is, based on what I have seen. I'm confused, Chad. And I don't know if anyone can explain it to me. I hope you guys can. When I do my eventual wrap-up, I want to ask you, how... Is this how morbing is? This is what I'm supposed to feel? I don't know. I don't know. Getting into the characters such as they are, or the lack there, I mean, the lack of characters in this movie. Jared Leto is Dr. Michael Morbius. I mean, there's nothing to him. The fact that he supposedly was method acting for this role is ridiculous. He's just a doctor. He's just a boring doctor guy. He's like, I just want to cure this blood disease. The thing is, like, there is potential for this character. Like, you have everything that you could probably want in a protagonist, where he has these altruistic intentions, like he's a good man, but he's afflicted with this horrible disease, right? That's totally unfair to him. And he wants to help himself, but he also wants to help others who have this terrible blood disease. And he is willing to cut corners and do what needs to be done again. Like, that's a nice setup. That's a really nice setup to a character who's going to struggle with what they become later on. Like, they should have honestly used The Fly as a template, and you really make you care for them, but you don't really care about him. By the time he becomes Morbius, the living vampire, you're already kind of like 15, maybe less than 20 minutes into the movie, and they try to fast track like all these relationships and talk about all of his accolades, and they give him this one little sequence with this little girl who also has the same disease, but there's just not enough there to the point when then he becomes Morbius and he starts killing everybody. And nothing feels earned with him. And they try to establish a romance with this doctor who's, her name is Dr. Martine. I call her Doctor Lady. There's a reason why I call her Doctor Lady in the movie, because there's a whole thing that happens, and it's kind of used as an excuse to have Morbius kill these people. But I'm just like, that's still not good enough reason to have him kill all these people. But in any case, they try to do a romance. They try to establish a friendship between him and Matt Smith, and there's just not enough. There's not enough there. That you buy his friendship, or you buy his romance with these characters, or his father figure in Jared Harris, where they literally have like one scene together, like just the movie opens up when they're children living. I didn't know Michael Morbius was Greek. Apparently he's Greek, chat. That was new to me. I was like, oh shit, I didn't know that. In any case, where Jared Harris is weird because it's obvious that he's a very talented man. He's a very talented actor, no doubt about it. Comes from a very prestigious acting family. But he knows that, like, I'm going to do, like, something like Chernobyl to really just showcase my talent. But I'm going to fucking get paid sometimes. I want a fucking nice car. I want a boat. And this was clearly his boat movie, where he's like, I will show up. You pay me this. But I don't want a lot of scenes. He's in the beginning, and he's at the very end of the film, and that's it. And so you don't establish they say, like, you're like our father. The thing is they do, and I hate this. This is bad writing and bad storytelling. Like, they constantly refer to the person they're talking to as something, but we never see that happen. Like, you're our father. You basically are our father figure. You raised us as our father. It's like, we don't see any of that. And so that's why we don't buy it. And that's what this movie does, because they're just spinning its wheels. And so Jared Leto just feels like a nothing character. He's so bland and blasé and boring. You don't really care that he's going through this horrific thing where his body is changing into a living vampire, chat. Because all of his relationships mean nothing. They tell you they mean something, but we never see it. The only character in this movie, honestly, who I had any enjoyment, I wouldn't say they were necessarily good, but at least they were fun to watch occasionally, and that was Matt Smith as Lucien and Milo. And so I was originally confused because for whatever reason, his name, like the character of Matt Smith, that's his character's name is Lucien, right? And you don't know, he's like apparently came from money, and his father was a criminal, and then he inherited the criminal empire. Again, this is all fast track. You just got to go with it. It's like, okay. But the reason why Michael Morbius calls him Milo is in the clinic that they apparently lived in Greece, the occupant of Lucien's bed before him died, and his name was Milo. And for whatever reason, Morbius just starts calling him Milo. That's your new name. You're Milo. It's like, I'm like, I don't understand this at all. It doesn't make in any case, that's his new name. It's a very weird detail, but he's just evil version of Michael Morbius. He has the same disease, but he has all this affluence, but he's never been able to truly enjoy it because of it. And it's like, okay. And so he feels like, I should be able to kill anyone because I haven't been able to enjoy myself. And it's like, that's a pretty dumb motivation. But the shit that they kind of have him do occasionally is really fun. There's a random dance scene in this movie where Matt Smith is just like, look at my body. Like, he's just like, yeah. He's showing off. He's just shaking his booty. He's twerking. I'm like, what the hell is happening? And I'm like, and he's going, rawr. He's constantly going, rawr. And he got his weird CGI face. And again, it's dumb. But at least he's giving me something. He's playing like a really broad villain in this movie. And for what he was doing, it was entertaining. Not nearly enough. Not a deep villain in any capacity. But unlike everyone else, at least he had some emotion behind his performance. Or everyone else is at like a fucking 3 and is just boring as hell. And that brings us to Dr. Lady, played by Adria Arjona. She plays Dr. Martine. She's a doctor. And the thing is, like, she loves Morbius, but he doesn't know it. It's that kind of like, I love you. And he's like, I'm busy with my work, woman. And it's like, oh, okay, here we go. It's like one of those kind of relationships. I didn't appreciate you until you're dying. And I guess she inevitably, quote unquote, dies in the movie. There's one sequence with her that just kind of stands out to me. And it's to just allow Morbius, let's allow a very supposedly graphic action scene happens. It's not graphic though. So for whatever reason, Dr. Morbius can't do his experiments on on United States because it's illegal, and so they have to use a boat on this giant shipping boat with that it uses as a cover so they can do their experiments in the open water, in international waters, basically, right? And all these guys, all these mercenaries were hired by Matt Smith, and they're just doing their job. But you have this one guy who he's been in he's a character actor. You see him in everything, where he goes to check on the doctor lady and Michael Morbius, and this is after like Michael Morbius injected himself with the splooge. And so he's splooging out, but the mercenary goes over and is like, "Excuse me, nurse." He says, "Well, excuse you, I'm a doctor." He's like, a lady can be a doctor?" And I'm like, oh, this is great. And because I'm like, oh, you're establishing that this very sexist guy, and so therefore you can then kill him horribly. Because now listen, you could be sexist piece of shit. Like, oh, that's not nice. Women, of course, could be doctors. Chat. He might not believe it, but they do that. So then when Morbius starts killing all the mercenaries, who I guess we can assume are all sexist too, that they all feel the same way as this character actor. I don't know. But that just gives him carte blanche to then go around the boat and executing all of these people. And they also tried to establish, like, oh, they were really bad guys. Even Matt Smith's like, well, they were just mercenaries, really bad people. It's fine. We can cover it up. It's like, wow, lazy writing again. But that's what it is. That's what it is. Like, he made a sexist comment, therefore he must die. It's like, okay. And all these other nameless people. Oh, and I love it, Chet, because there's a couple blackifices in the movie. Listen, if you have a mysterious ethnicity, you're going down, Chad. If you're brown, you're going down. That's how it is. If you're white, you're probably going to be all right, okay? That's how this works, Chad. Where you have this one black mercenary who says, "Get out of here, guys. I'll hold him off." And then he proceeds to die horribly. I mean, implied to die horribly, chat. He gets slashed up the stomach. He goes, no blood. Slash across, loses his eyeball. No blood. And slash across the throat. No blood. But there is a blackifice, chat. There's several black. And then we have this nurse who wasn't doing anything to anybody, chat, just doing her goddamn job. And again, her greatest sin, chat, is that she was ethnically mysterious, and she gets drained of all of her blood for no reason. We just needed someone to die. That's what that was. But yeah, and then she's the doctor lady in the movie. Again, she doesn't do anything. She has a very awkward romance with Michael Morbius. They steal a scene from Blade. So at one point, Matt Smith's character finds out that, oh, you clearly love her. I'm going to use her against you. And he, like, uses his thumb and stabs her in the throat of his thumb because he's got a big old vampiric nail. And she's like, oh, and so she's bleeding out. We don't see any blood. And, she's dying. And Michael Morbius is like, oh, I want to kiss you now. And they kiss. And she bites his lip or something. So then that would get him to be like, I must feed. And she's like, make it mean something. And he feeds on her, chat. And just starts sucking all her blood out. And then he has the strength to then fight Matt Smith and kill him, whatever. Well, one of the end credits in the movie, Chad, is that she's alive. She's alive after he bites her. Now she's a vampire too. So that's what's going to happen. Maybe in a sequel. We're not going to get a sequel. But she's supposed to come back apparently, Chad. But her wasted. Jared Harris, again, collecting that fucking check. Good for you, Jared Harris. He's in the first 5 minutes, and he has like a little 3.5 minute section where he's like, Matt Smith, why'd you become a vampire? I'm like your dad. I'm very dad disappointed in you. And, Matt Smith's very upset that his father figure's upset with him, and he just fucking is like, well, now that you think I'm a monster, I'm just going to kill you. It does all the things you expect. He fucking guts him, slashes his throat, and he's like, I'm leaving, father. And then, Jared Leto comes by. He's like, you're like a father to me. He's like, yeah. Hey, could you bite me so I could live as a vampire? And Morbius is like, nah. And then Jared Harris dies. They do that. Wasted. He got money, though. There are other characters in the film. You have Al Madrigal as Agent Rodriguez. He's an FBI agent hunting Morbius, and his partner, chat, is Tyrese Gibson, is Simon Stroud. Now, both of these characters, I believe, are from the comics. Simon Stroud is a monster hunter from the comics, chat, and it was so funny, because I got this off of Wikipedia, because I remember like watching like a interview. I had like YouTube going, I'm editing things, putting stuff together, and Tyrese Gibson was talking about his character, and how he's really excited about it, because Gibson noted, the character is white in the comic books, and the producers made him black to cast Gibson. While Gibson describes Shroud as a superhero, quote-unquote, with a high-tech weapons-grade arm, quote-unquote, in the film, all scenes featuring his arm were cut. Gibson's side of the 3-picture deal when he joined the film. So I noticed this, chat, throughout the movie, and I don't know if it was all reshoots, but, because you know the trailers, like, it's like, does fucking Tyrese Gibson have, like, a metal mechanical arm? If you look at the trailers, he does. But, and all those scenes are gone. They're not in the movie at all. But there's a shit ton of other scenes when they constantly have him with an overcoat on, like a detective's overcoat, and his, which hand is it? I forget if it's like his right or left hand is always in his pocket. So they're just hiding the fact that he has like a robot arm. And I'm like, okay. Why? I mean, is him having a robot arm too unrealistic? There's a line in the movie where, Tyrese Gibson fakes Michael Morbius because Michael Morbius invents synthetic blood. And he's like, your synthetic blood saved my arm. So maybe they retconned it. He was supposed to have a robot arm. But then at the end of the movie, the very end of the movie, we see finally Tyrese Gibson without the overcoat, and he has a robot arm. And no one's calling attention to his robot arm. And so you could just tell this movie was completely just edited and cut to shit in post. And he's just, fucking Tyrese Gibson, listen, I got none against the guy. He has delusions of grandeur quite often, chat, to say that he's not a superhero. He's not a superhero, chat. He's a tertiary character in a very bad superhero movie. I would say that. Where the fact that, they were actually trying to hide your cool, quote-unquote, superhero thing from audiences for whatever reason. But, yeah, it's very easy to dunk on him because, famously there was he retweeted this fake tweet from Martin Scorsese. Then Martin Scorsese said, Morbius, this is cinema. And he didn't say that, and so it was kind of funny and sad. But he clowned himself again. He so often clowns himself, chat, Tyrese Gibson. But yeah, he gets nothing to do. Him and Al Madrigal get absolutely nothing to do in this movie. All they do is they're so mild-mannered, but they just go and interview people. Like, the thing is, this is the big mistake with their roles. They discover things that we've already seen. And so in the movie, we know Matt Smith is the bad guy, right? We see him doing all these things. Well, 20 minutes after we already know Matt Smith is the bad guy, they figure out that Matt Smith's the bad guy. It's like, well, we know already. It's not interesting. You could have cut out most of their stuff in the film and just have some generic police officers, and it would have been fine. There's so much content in this movie you can literally cut. The movie's only it's less than an hour and 40 minutes long. But I feel like you can cut maybe 15 to 20 minutes out, and you can have like a 70-minute movie. Maybe like a 75-minute movie, and you'd be better for it because it's so horribly paced and so boring. How this movie ends is still kind of confusing to me. Like, I guess Morbius is now on the run. I don't know. Like, he killed Matt Smith. He ain't come back, as far as I know. I don't know. Maybe he will. I doubt it. Oh, funny enough, the reason why Matt Smith he was unsure of doing another big genre film after like Terminator Genesis, but he was convinced by Karen Gillan, who I guess worked on Doctor Who with him, and the director of this film, who he did stuff with, Daniel Espinosa, to join the MCU, but it's not really the MCU. I kind of feel bad for him because he probably went under circumstances that he was not aware of that were untrue. But I guess Morbius is on the run, Chad. I don't know. He's in the American Southwest now doing his thing. I'm not sure. I don't think it'll matter eventually, Chad. The movie just kind of ends after him defeating Matt Smith, and he just flies away. And that's it. So yeah, honestly, it's just, there's not really enough to spoil. Matt Smith dies. The other characters you don't care about died. Michael Keaton's in it, and it feels such an afterthought. Dr. Lady's not dead. She's a vampire now, I guess. Yeah, it just, the thing is, with Morbius, maybe this can go up almost like a separate discussion. Even though I feel like if the only way you should do a Morbius movie is with Spider-Man in the film. You know, they're inherently connected to each other, or with another Marvel hero. Like, I don't know if Morbius has enough material to warrant a standalone film. Maybe after you've established him in other movies, Chad, like, how I would approach this, maybe Stephen Norrington had the right idea all those years ago. I think it would have been better if you had Morbius as a side character or supporting character in a Blade movie or a Marvel movie that featured vampires, chat. You know, there's a lot of potential with something like that. And you can have him more as an anti-hero or more of a victim of circumstance. You can borrow more things from like David Cronenberg's The Fly, make him a tragic figure. He doesn't understand why he's going through those mutations. Like there was just obviously better material out there that you could borrow or outright steal from to make a better movie or to make him a stronger supporting character in the film. When it comes down to it, is that this is just Sony trying to capitalize on characters that they have no understanding of, or they're willfully misunderstanding because they just don't really care. They just want to establish a competitor to the MCU, and they will adapt characters without really showcasing who they are. It's the same case of something like Venom, and certainly it seems to be the same case of something like Kraven, where Kraven is a psychopath who hunts people. He got bored of hunting animals, and he wants to prove himself, and so he begins to hunt superhumans. And he picks Spider-Man. He's like, I want to hunt that guy. That's who Kraven is. He's insane. And in this new movie, this alleged Kraven that we're going to be getting is an environmentalist who is a vegetarian who wants to protect animals. That is not who Kraven is. Much in the same way that this is just not Morbius with the Morbius film. It's just a complete mess, chap. And I don't think Sony has any idea what they're doing, and it feels like they know that and they still don't care, and it's frustrating because I think it's going to start to affect a lot of other characters that we really do care about. We want to see adapt in the best way. I'm not even like Morbius is like, all right, whatever. We never get another adaptation of Morbius. That's fine, but I can even recognize that there's potential for this character, and it sucks that his true cinematic debut was handled so poorly. It's very frustrating, chat. So. I don't think this is the worst movie of the year. I think there are other worse films this year, but it's a very bad movie, and there's no excuse. There is simply no excuse for a superhero film or a genre film to be this bad and to be this boring. It's 2022, all right? It's not 1997. It's not 2003. Audiences expect more. Fans expect more. Hell, people who just go to the movies just to see what's out there, they expect more, and they deserve better. So, yeah, if I were to give this a rating on the double toasted scale, Che, I want to hear your opinions on the film, of course. I would, I don't know. Low, some old bullshit. I don't know if it's quite a fuck you. I wasn't offended by it. I would just give it a some old bullshit, Che. Straight up some old bullshit, low some old bullshit, sure. It's a bad movie. It's a bad movie, chap. That's just how I feel about Morbius shit and just kind of the state of Sony. I think I might do another video just talking about what is Sony's Spider-Man-less Spider-Man verse. I think it might be something we could talk about maybe this Friday or something. Other than that, it's a waste of time. People are like, watch the movie. The only thing I would say, the best circumstance under which to watch this movie is with an audio-video commentary. That's the only thing I could say, which you'll be getting very soon on my Patreon. Other than that, I don't know if it's worth watching, in my opinion.